I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Tonight we're talking about the upcoming election and specifically about an interesting measure that Oregonians are going to vote on statewide. It's called Measure 118, and it would give seemingly free money to every Oregonian. But is anything really free? Measure 118, that's our big story tonight. Well, no, nothing's ever free. It's just, an interesting price. So we're all just on the same page. Let's cover this really quickly. Oregon law allows anyone who gathers enough signatures to put a change in law up for a statewide vote. Those are called measures. Well, in less than 6 weeks, Oregon voters will decide the fate of Measure 118. If it passes, 118 would send roughly $1,600 to each and every Oregonian every year. It would come as either a check or a tax credit, which sounds interesting. And maybe you're sitting at home thinking about what you would do with another $1,600 every year. But lawmakers across the political spectrum in Oregon hate this measure, and they hope you'll vote no. Financial supporters of the measure seem to be mostly wealthy Californians, according to the Oregon Capital Chronicle. They obviously think it's a good idea. Let's dig into it, and you can decide for yourself. If Measure 118 passes, it would increase the corporate minimum tax by 3% on the total sales in Oregon of companies, not their net profit, but their sales above $25 million. And it would fall on a relatively small number of companies. According to the state, 1,422 C corporations would be impacted and about 791 S corporations. So that's 2,213 corporations out of a total of 120,476 corporations in the state. So that small number would pay the higher tax. That money would then go back to me and you. It would be distributed equally among Oregon residents, all ages, all income levels, estimated $1,600 a person. If voters approve the measure, it would go into effect next year and the money would start rolling out in 2026. But huge opposition has lined up against it, mostly because it would have a huge budget impact on the state budget, costing the state an estimated $1 billion a year. That's not a small amount. Businesses large and small, elected officials, both Democrats and Republicans, including Governor Tina Kotek, trade groups and local chambers of commerce, they all say this is a bad idea. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek told the Willamette Week it may look good on paper, but it's flawed and it would punch a huge hole in the state budget and put essential services for low-wage and working families at risk. But the petitioner who brought the measure to the ballot says he wants to see big corporations pay more in taxes.
Number one, giant corporations are not paying their fair share in taxes. This is sort of just about everybody agrees with this. And number two, we also noticed that we as working class folks were finding it ever harder to make ends meet. And we talk about that now being a problem after all this greedflation that we've just gone through and the pandemic. But really, we started working on this in 2018, 2019, before the pandemic. And back then, we were still having trouble making ends meet. And so we thought, what if we put these two concerns together? What if we have giant corporations start to pay their fair share in taxes, and then use that money to give people a rebate so they can use that money as they choose.
Now, I haven't talked to them all, but I'll bet the corporations would say we're already paying a fair share now. But that petitioner says more money in our pockets is a good thing for everyone.
Not only is our life going to be materially improved, $1,600 is not going to solve every problem that you have, but it's certainly going to help us. But also importantly, it's going to help our community. And this is really important. So when we all go out and we spend our $1,600, however we think we got to spend that money, it's up to us. Then our economy is going to do better. Particularly our Main Street, our local economies are going to flourish.
But the coalition against Measure 118 says it would be bad for consumers, bad for business, bad for the state's general fund. Hundreds of organizations have signed on against the measure and donated millions to try and defeat it. The opposition is calling Measure 118 the biggest tax increase in Oregon history, and they say we'll all be paying more for the things we buy if it passes. Here's Angela Wilhelms with the Oregon Business and Industry, that's a state business lobby.
I think because this is a tax on sales, but a tax on sales at every step of the supply chain, it's even worse from a consumer impact standpoint than a traditional sales tax, which happens once at that final point of sale. Think about an Oregon-made product. You could have a company, let's say a landowner that harvests a tree, and they could have to pay this tax when they sell that lumber or that timber to the mill. The mill might have to pay the tax when they sell a 2x4 to a wholesaler, who would have to pay the tax when they sell it to a retailer, who would have to pay the tax when they sell it to the consumer who just wants to, I don't know, fix a patio or something. So this is way worse than a traditional sales tax. It's almost like a hidden tax. But I think at the end of the day, consumers know that they're going to end up paying for this, and they're going to end up paying for it sometimes 1, 2, 3, or even 4 times over before the day is done.
However, the chief petitioner says he disagrees with all of that and that large corporations are paying hardly anything in taxes compared to small local businesses, and the Measure 118 would balance things out. Now, it's never easy digging into an analysis of tax data, but we're fortunate to have the Legislative Revenue Office doing a lot of the heavy lifting for us and the public. They did an analysis of Measure 118 and found that the measure has significant implications for the state's general fund. They say Measure 118 would result in a negative cash flow because the increase in those tax collections would be less than what it would cost to fund the rebates and the rebate program. And they say there would be a reduction to the state's rainy day fund. They also say the rebate program would also complicate the corporate kicker, which funds schools, because that money would also be earmarked for the rebates, and you can't spend the same dollar twice. So there are big general fund implications there. And they say the new tax would bring about 1.3% increase to inflation in Oregon. The group Tax Fairness Oregon, which typically advocates for higher taxes on corporations, well, they call this measure a hot mess. They say it's poorly written and fails to consider the impacts on the general fund and unintended consequences. For instance, people getting federal benefits might lose them if the rebate is considered income. The Oregon Center for Public Policy, which advocates for cash payments for families, also agrees. The pro-Measure 118 folks say their campaign has a plan to work with the legislature on implementation, and they don't really believe it will be so bad for the state or affect people receiving benefits. Lots of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle disagree, however. Oregon's top Democrats sent out a joint statement last month. They wrote, "In these tough times, we all want working families to get every break they can, but Measure 118 is not the answer. We have grave concerns it will slow job growth and cause cuts to critical services. As a matter of public policy, we believe this is a bad deal for Oregonians." And that's the Democrats. On the Republican side, the Senate Republican caucus says it threatens our economic stability by driving up costs for businesses and consumers, leading to widespread job losses and higher prices for goods and services. This measure will result in severe cuts to essential public services, including education, public safety, and infrastructure. We cannot afford to gamble with Oregon's future on unproven and risky policies. Now, we want you to tell us what you think. Does this sound like something you want to vote for? Why or why not? And are you getting hit up by the ads? I know I am on my phone, text, and emails from both sides. Send us your thoughts, will you? Or your questions. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or you can call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. Now to an update on the most expensive wildfire season in Oregon history. Last week we told you how the Oregon Department of Forestry is basically out of money to pay firefighters and contractors, requesting tens of millions of dollars from a state emergency board to ensure the folks fighting fires are getting paid. Investigative reporter Evan Watson joins me now. You've been following this. What's the latest?
Well, Oregon lawmakers approved that money, allocating $47.5 million to paying these costs to firefighters and contractors, including half of the emergency board's general fund balance going to these wildfires. But now They're saying, hey, we need a new strategy here, a new way to pay for fighting fires. Even with this emergency allocation, state analysts project ODF will be insolvent by November without even more help, including a payroll loan and executive action. Some lawmakers say the current system is untenable, knowing that it's possible wildfires are only going to get worse each year due to climate change and other factors. Fire costs have risen too high, and the state now requires a new strategy.
The Falls Fire alone up north of Burns, $100 million. $100 million to suppress. Financially, Oregon, even with insurance policies, cannot suppress their way out of this issue. We have to figure out how we work with our federal agencies on our public ground in order to mitigate and manage our way out of this. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to point out the obvious. This is going to get expensive.
Representative Mark Owens also said he just talked to contractors who helped Oregon fight fires this summer who are desperately needing that reimbursement money.
ODF, because of the budget crunch right now and the amount of money that needs to go out, owes this company $1.1 million. They called me yesterday. They don't have enough money to pay payroll. And it's not ODF, but that's why we need to act on this today. Because they're going to have to go to get a loan in order to pay their employees because ODF is delayed.
Tight cash flow there.
Yeah.
All right, so if ODF got a huge chunk, half of the emergency fund money, who didn't get it?
Right, there's not enough slices of the pie for everyone, right? I've got one good example for you. Governor Kotek wanted the Port of Portland to ask the E-Board for money for critical investments at the port's Terminal 6. That's Oregon's only international shipping container terminal. The E-Board deferred that request to a later meeting, prioritizing those wildfire costs now. And the port told me in a statement, in part, we know that many Oregon communities have been devastated by wildfires this year and support state investments in those areas. And we look forward to continuing this conversation with the Joint Emergency Board in December.
So hang on. We're not saying no yet,
Right.
but we're not saying yes.
Yes, but also that delays things further. So, of course,
yeah.
impacts like that.
All right, I know you've also been following this ambulance thing with the one paramedic and one EMT. What's the latest on that? How's it going?
Right. AMR, the ambulance provider, is really praising the system right now, saying that 10 days ago they rolled out this new layout, this hybrid model, really went full force with that, and they've seen improvements to both the number of ambulances on the street and level 0, which are those cases where there are 0 ambulances available when someone calls an emergency and needs that help. Now, the day before the rollout, AMR logged nearly 2 hours of the day at level 0. That next day, September 16th, they recorded just 11 minutes. And on 4 of the days since then, including yesterday and Tuesday of this week, AMR says there were no level 0 incidents at all. Now, I've requested and I'm still waiting on the full data to show this. They kind of promised that to me today and got part of it. We'll follow up, of course. But company leaders are excited, praising the hiring of new EMTs and what they see as clear improvements. One caveat to this, though. However, Teamsters 223, the union representing the paramedics, is a little more hesitant to declare outright success after just 10 days, writing to us, while we applaud any increase in the number of available ambulances, it's crucial that AMR maintains high-quality standards in patient care. This means ensuring that each ambulance is staffed with experienced, well-trained professionals who are not overstretched or overworked. And there's a big deadline coming up here, Pat, as well. AMR has until November 1st to meet those county benchmarks and standards. If you remember, the county said, hey, we'll let you try this, but you need to get response times to here. You need to do X, Y, and Z. November 1st is that key day, and we'll watch that closely.
Okay, well, it sounds like right now it's where it always should have been.
It's definitely, especially with
ambulances.
level 0 being a really big point here.
Yeah.
If they're having days with no level 0 cases, that's what you and I and others have been clamoring for all along. You should never call 911 and get told there are no ambulances available.
Absolutely right. Okay, thanks, Evan. Appreciate that update. Coming up next on the story, remember these billboards around downtown Portland critical of the district attorney, Mike Schmidt, and County Chair Jessica Vega Peterson? Well, the political group behind them is shutting down now. I talked with the founders today to find out why when the story returns. People for Portland, a political action group that sprang up 3 years ago and relentlessly called out a lack of action by political leaders in the city, well, they're shutting down. The group was founded by two political operatives in town, Kevin Looper, there with the beard. He typically helps run progressive and Democratic campaigns. And Dan Levy with the glasses. He typically helps run conservative and Republican campaigns. They came together to build an organization that ended up with 35,000 email followers. They're shutting down now because they say this part of the work is done.
It's clear we've changed the politics of Portland, which is what we set out to do. When we started this, the prevailing winds out there were that all cops are bad, you shouldn't tell people where to sleep, and hard drugs are not a problem. And we have taken on all of those positions. We have pierced the ideology that says we shouldn't be doing something about each and every one of those things. And we believe we put Portland on a better path. We don't believe we fixed it. But it is clear to us now that shame as a motivator for politicians in Portland, we've exhausted that resource. And now if you can't change what the politicians are doing, you've got to actually change the politicians. And that's up to the people. That's not up to us. That's not appropriate for what People for Portland sought out to do and what it is legally.
People for Portland is the group that paid for billboards in downtown Portland criticizing the district attorney, Mike Schmidt, as he ran for re-election. They felt the DA's criminal justice reform policies led to lawlessness. They called Portland a Schmidt show, and Schmidt lost the election.
Well, we channeled the frustrations of a majority of Portlanders versus a loud minority that had been dominating the political debates. And so camping ban, getting a camping ban passed, right? Calling out the DA for his failures on public safety in particular, right? Advocating for more police when people weren't doing that. Those are all things that enjoyed majority support. And I think one of the most important legacies that we have here, in addition to sort of the policy changes that have occurred and the change in the debate, is the legacy of getting more people engaged and creating comfort in the crowd for people to say out loud what they know to be true.
By the way, the group says it is not endorsing any candidates in the upcoming election, where city voters will elect a brand new form of government in Portland. Coming up next on The Story, a new series focused on housing in our region, but we're not looking at affordable housing or the homeless crisis. Instead, why it's becoming more and more difficult for people with middle incomes to afford a home. What some are doing when they find themselves stuck in the middle. When The Story returns. We talk a lot about the lack of affordable housing in our area, and there certainly is a lack, and the huge challenges people are having to try to pay for a place to live. But the housing crisis is not just for folks considered low income. Increasingly, middle income people are having a hard time buying a home. Tim Gordon explores the issue in a new series that he's calling Stuck in the Middle.
Inside a yellow house on a quiet street on the edge of Milwaukee lives the Driscoll family.
So this is our kitchen, tons of storage. We love the storage.
Experiencing the feelings that come with first-time homeownership.
It's finally feeling like home.
For the family, it's like just knowing that this is our home. It's not, a temporary thing. There's no temporariness to it.
Darren and Deanna's journey to buying their first home was about 6 years long. As they began to think about how to make it happen, COVID hit and made it more difficult to decide and commit. But when Darren's career changed and income increased, they re-engaged into a still difficult housing market.
Yeah, there's some little hiccups here and there where one of the big ones was interest rates jumping. I mean, that was a huge burden. It was oh, we're so close. And then we saw interest rates just keep climbing. And as we're looking at houses, it was yeah, we're just not gonna be able to do it. So we had to wait a couple more years.
But now they have this updated 4-bedroom single-bath home they and their 3 kids love. How did they finally do it? Well, the short answer is with some help, and it started with the down payment. The Driscolls saved each month into an individual development account, or IDA. It was matched 3 times over with federal funds through the nonprofit Portland Housing Center. The nonprofit, founded in 1991, has helped more than 10,000 families become successful homeowners through a variety of programs. For the Driscolls, it required time, discipline, and some required budgeting and homeownership education.
So this was built in the 60s.
But it got them over the first and probably biggest hurdle.
Even higher income borrowers, for first-time home buyers, oftentimes the barrier to entry is the down payment.
The Driscolls' loan officer with OnPoint knows firsthand the challenges many clients face. Dustin Johnson says a variety of options are available from both private and government organizations, including OnPoint's Zero Down program, which doesn't require you to pay mortgage insurance. It comes with a higher interest rate, but it's a way to get started.
It's one of the most popular programs I use for first-time home buyers because it gets you in the door.
And Johnson says you can always refinance later for better rates. Also, sticking with the same lender can save a lot on closing costs. In the case of the Driscolls, they didn't need the zero down, but did go with an adjustable rate mortgage, a 7-year ARM.
And that locks us into a 7-year kind of guaranteed rate, and it was low, it was 6.75, which is comparably low at the time. That was in March or April, I think it was.
Open the door.
Open it. Open it.
And now, in September, they are loving their new reality, which includes space to play.
I think when we saw the yard, it was kind of all bets were off. It was okay, this is what's going to be.
And that's good for everyone.
We love this area. It's very quiet. The kids already have friends in the neighborhood, which we've never had before.
Yeah.
Congratulations. What a great yard, too. That's Tim Gordon reporting. Any of you experiencing the dilemma of having a decent income but not enough for a down payment in this housing market? Tim would love to hear from you. Just get in touch with our team here at The Story and we'll pass your messages along. Our email is thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thank you so much for watching. But remember, The Story, our collective story, well, that never ends. For those of you watching online, we'll see you next time, however you find us. And for the rest of you watching live, the good stuff's coming your way next. And I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.